Cecil speaking. This is October 23rd, 1991. I'm speaking today to Colonel Forniash, Cecil Forniash, and this will be tape 3. Thank you. But I'm not going to let it run too long without a check. I've got the heading in it now already.
See, I arrived in on the Shikoku at what at least the prisoners there called the Officers Propaganda Camp at Zensuji, and it was right next to a Japanese Army camp. There were prisoners from Wake, Guam, the Southwest Pacific, Dutch prisoners, British, from Hong Kong, Singapore, and the Dutch East Indies, and some Australians who had been captured in the islands. So it was sort of a joint officers camp with enlisted people from Wake and Guam, about 700 of international officers there, and I suppose 300 or 400 enlisted people from the Navy and Marine Corps out of Wake and Guam. When I arrived there, they had small loaves of bread. I estimate 4 to 6 ounces, which was our meal at noontime. Of course, we had not seen anything like that while I'd been a prisoner of war, and it was particularly good. They also had beans in the rice, which of course meant some protein for us, which we hadn't had. And this was very good for the Philippine prisoners who were coming out of the various other factories in Japan to Zensuji. When I arrived there, they brought officers from 2 other camps that had gone up on the same ship I had gone up on in 1942 into Zensuji. And I recall the people who were there at Zensuji from Wake and Guam were particularly distressed about our condition as we came in, and of course they did their best to try to rehabilitate us with the food that was there we were getting at that point in time, and it did help us quite a bit. Treatment there was good. Comparatively speaking, was good. I don't think in the 2 years I was there, I was hit more than 2 or 3 times by a Japanese soldier or Japanese guard. On one incident, they did put Bob Ray and myself in the little jail they had there, two small cells. And fortunately, they put us both in the same jail. It was November, and it was cold, and they took all of our clothes and put us in. And the idea was because we had too much Japanese yen on us. They had started paying the officers at this propaganda camp 50 yen a month. They said that they were supposed to pay us what the officers in the Japanese Army of the same grade would receive under the Geneva Convention. But they were going to pay us 50 yen a month, and the balance would be invested in the Japanese mine. In any event, theoretically, every month we were to let them know how many yen we had left, and we could always get up to 50 yen. Well, every month, almost every officer put in for the full 50 yen. And obviously there was no place to spend the money, so we should have had the 50 yen from the prior month, but they kept giving us that 50 yen. And so we played bridge, and we played poker, and we played blackjack, and we had funny money. And on this particular night, we had been, I believe we were playing blackjack or something like that, and I was the banker, and I was paying off the last man at the table, Bob Ray. And of course, we both had a lot of yen, and of course he had too much, over 50 yen, and I had more than 50 yen. So they, of course, took us, Japanese guard immediately took us down and confronted us with the officer of the day, and they took our clothes and put us in a little cell they had for prisoners. And it got very cold, and I thought they would let us out fairly quickly because it was fairly obvious we couldn't stay out there too long because it was cold. And the Japanese officer of the day came in, I guess, around 8 o'clock or 8:30, and I told Bob Ray that's when he's going to let us out. And he came in and looked at us and laughed and left. So then we thought we might be there for the entire night and didn't know whether we were going to make it or not. But about midnight or 1 o'clock, I don't know exactly the time, the officer of the day did come back, and he had a sergeant with him and brought our clothes back, and didn't say anything, just gave our clothes back and told us to get up into back to our barracks, which we did. One other incident I remember happened to me was we called him Club Fist. I guess I was laying back sort of on the area where I was supposed to sleep, and we weren't supposed to lay down any time during the day. And this Club Fist found me. I was laying down a bit. He grabbed me by the hair and pulled me up under the thing, and then swung at me. And I always fell down. I told people, "Hey, no standing up and defying him. All he wants you to do is go down, and that's it." I just fall down. They're the top dog then, and they've accomplished their purpose. So nobody's taking any more physical punishment. Other interesting incidents that somebody might be interested in that occurred there to show the condition of the people even there, what we call the propaganda camp. One evening, the rumor got out that they had to throw away a bunch of rice because they had found rat poison in the rice. And Lou Lazzarini, who was in Pennsylvania, he was a chemical engineer. He says, "Hey," he said, "I know what that would be." He said, I could identify it. He said, "Let's find out what they did with the rice." And so we had empty Red Cross boxes, and we found out that they had covered the rice up back on the camp someplace. We went back and uncovered it and filled our Red Cross boxes with rice, as did a lot of other people found out about it, and they went and got some rice too. In any event, we went ahead and let Lou examine the rice, and he decided it was all right, and we went ahead and ate it. So we got no bad results out of it.
Let me be sure this is working okay now. Okay.
Since I was talking about the space there, it reminded me of the Japanese concern about space. None of the prison camps did we ever have more than 30 inches of space from one side to the other, one prisoner to another. And the space was about probably 7 feet long and anywhere from 26 to 30 inches wide in all the camps that I was in. You had a tatami, a little old Japanese mat that you slept on. And this was a little bit difficult, particularly when you got skinny, because you kind of wear sores on your bony hips because you didn't have much meat over your hips at that point in time. But this was true throughout our imprisonment. Another interesting aspect came up while we were there. The Japanese Army had a bakery just across the fence from where we were located, and they had a barbed wire fence inside and then a wooden fence about 8 or 10 feet high, solid wooden fence beyond the barbed wire. And of course we could smell the baking of bread and the bakery of some sweet items over in that bakery almost every day. And so I learned that people were going over to that bakery, and I could understand why, because where I was on the second floor, and we could see the workers as they would leave that bakery, and those women with the big old panelings or whatever they could have carried out 2 sacks of flour in a panel, and nobody had ever known it. We just thought they were stealing all that stuff from the bakery. So I said, well, I just want to be part of that too. So Sweet Wall, who was an Iowan, as I was, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and I decided, well, we'll just go over there and get some of that ourselves, which we did. At one time, when we were going over there, we always tried to spot the Japanese guard, and you dug out from under the fence and went under the high fence, and went on over, and the doors to the bakery, you could pull the windows open, and you'd go in and you'd get you some buns or some bread and sugar, and then come back into camp with. But this night, Sweet and I went out, and he had gone to go under the fence, and didn't dig down deep enough, and got caught in the bottom of the fence. At that time, the Japanese guard walked around, and I was standing at the corner of the building waiting for him to get under the fence so I could follow. And of course, I gave him a signal that he laid still, and I got back into the barracks and waited to see what was going to happen. Well, he laid still until the Japanese guard went by and decided he better come back. Anyway, I don't know what was wrong with the Japanese guard. I don't know how he failed to see me or failed to see Sweet under the fence, but he was caught there. But this was a pretty good source for a little bit of additional food for us. And during the course of the 2 years I was there, we were all very thankful to our Red Cross. Although there's obviously a building full of Red Cross parcels, and they were not distributed very fast, at least during the time I was there. I think each of us received about 11 complete Red Cross boxes while we were there. And frankly, it's probably what made the difference between getting home and not getting home. Zensuji was a reasonably pleasant camp, and we did not have the deaths that we'd had in the other camps. Indicated the numbers of people I believe were in the camp. And during that period of time I was there, we had 7 people that died, and most of them were older, and I don't consider that out of proportion, probably in accordance with the population that we had in that prison camp. I recall one afternoon I was inside the barracks and I heard somebody yelling, "Skyriders, Skyriders." You know, I said, gee, I haven't seen anything like that in Japan since I've been out here. So I went out to see what was going on, and I saw coming up from the south, saw vapor stream, barely, I don't know how high it might have been, but I watched that time, and I said, well, that's the first American plane I've seen since the Philippines. And noticed he run on up north, made a circle, and headed back. And the next morning, the paper read the bombs in Nakota. Gee, I didn't think I'd ever forget the name of these places. I guess your memory slips you. And anyway, it's an ironworks in southern Honshu. So that plane was obviously up there running a reconnaissance. At least that was what we thought at that point in time. It might be interesting to know that when I arrived at Zensuji in June of '43, they were getting the Osaka Mainichi and the Tokyo Times, English versions of the newspaper, because at that point in time, of course, the Japanese were doing quite well in the war situation. And when things started going against them, of course, they stopped bringing the English version of newspapers into our camp. But fortunately, we had a couple of Navy officers who could read the Japanese language. And we had a work detail with enlisted people who went down to Takamatsu and worked on the docks, and they brought back Japanese newspapers in the Japanese, and the 2 naval officers would translate them, and almost every evening they'd go into every room and brief everybody as to what was going on.
Could you, did the Japanese in their newspapers written in Japanese, were they pretty forthright with the Japanese citizens, or did they try to cover it up?
Well, it's our view that, of course, it was obvious to us that they quit giving us the English version because they'd start losing.
Yeah.
And as time passed, we were getting a translation of these newspapers. They would start talking to certain other islands as they went along. It wasn't long before we really concluded that they were just preparing the people for the loss of those islands, because it wouldn't be too long, a month or 2 months later, after they talked about the threat, the island would be gone. They would acknowledge the island had been taken. So as that situation developed, it developed that way all the way through. We continued to get these kinds of news reports out of the Japanese papers following Zensuji up until the time we left in June of '45, when it was obvious that they thought the threat was to Shikoku from our forces. And at that point in time, they separated us out and sent the American prisoners to Rokuroshi. I'm not too sure where they sent the other international prisoners, but most of them were moved out too, and I don't know where they went. I could have found out because many of them have been at Zensuji meetings since that time that we've had. We've had a number of them come to the United States and attend our reunions with Zensujians. We were taken up to the island, back on the main island Honshu, and north of Fukui. I'd say probably 15 miles. And very typically, of course, I remember that trip at I was probably in better condition then than I was when I arrived in Japan off the boat. But it still wasn't, most of us weren't that healthy at that point in time, but they filled those little streetcars, just jammed us in as tight as they could get us, and to carry us up to Rokuroshi. Of course, the last few miles we had to walk. at that point, we had been getting 390 grams of rice, that's in suji, a day. That's dry rice cooked, and that would give you a small jelly can of rice about 3 times a day, about so big, about that high, packed, which ultimately you would not be sustained on that. Everybody's losing weight at that point in time. But we got up to Roshi, and they reduced our ration to 290 grams of rice. And it became obvious, it's obvious to all of us that we'd not make it through the winter at that rate. Fortunately, of course, by that time, up in that area, we could hear the American airplanes overhead, see that the cities were on fire. The skyline would be ablaze. And hopefully the war would not last too long. I don't know what I mentioned before, but we had at Sensuji, Captain Lazzarini and Lieutenant Smith and Sam Dillard. Smith was an artillery officer, Dillard was Air Corps. They were 2 lieutenants, and Lazzarini and I were 2 captains. We had decided that if things got too tough, we were going to try to get away. We were going to try to get to the coast and get a boat and go to Japan, go to China. Mm-hmm. And at Rokuroshi, of course, things got looking that bad. And so the 2 lieutenants came to Lazzarini and myself and said, time to go. We're not going to make it here. And of course the plan was basically to go to the Japanese warehouse and break in, try to get enough food to survive, and then travel at night and hole up, try to find a place to hide during the daytime and head for the coast. And at that point in time, of course, the planes were up overhead almost every night. And and Lou and I said, no, this war's about over. It's coming to a close. The Japanese can't stand this. I mean, we don't think the war's over. And they said, no, we're going. And he said, well, Lou and I said, well, we're not going. We're going to stay here. We think the war's about over. And they turned that night, of course, that they were going to take off. I didn't know at the time, but I was one of they had an internal guard. You had to be internal American guard, plus there were guards outside. I'm not too sure what we were supposed to do, but I know I was on from 12 to 2 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And of course, then the thought occurred to me, wonder what the Japanese are going to do when they find out 2 people disappeared during the nighttime. And of course, it's on the guards, the people who were supposed to be around there. And anyway, the next morning it comes up. Well, that night, Lou and Lazzarini and I were sleeping side by side. I mean, one on top of the other practically. And right after the count, or muster, or tinko, as we call it in Japan, they turn the lights out. You guys go to bed. And we lay down, and sure, we heard those dogs start barking. And Lou and I, of course, lay there whispering to one another about what was probably going on out there. And we had agreed, basically, in plan with Forbes going to take off, that we go to the warehouse. If we couldn't get anything, couldn't get any food, we were going to come back into camp. Because we couldn't live off the land, because you wouldn't be able to find anything at night. And so the dogs barked over there for half an hour or so, and of course we wondered whether they got caught or what had happened. But anyway, the next morning the Japanese come in, take the take or muster, and reports 2 men missing. They couldn't believe that. It counts again. 2 men missing. Count us again. They finally got the idea that the 2 people were missing. And so it was interesting what they did. Immediate reaction was to take the men sleeping on either side of the 2 people who were missing and took them down to the office and tied them up out in the hot sun. It wasn't hot, but it was the sun. It was still warm that time. And of course, didn't know how long that was going to last. And that afternoon, they had caught the 2, and they had them tied up and brought them back to the camp. And apparently to show them how they'd escaped. Well, there's been no problem to escape. When the camp I was in, you couldn't escape very easily if you had any place to go. So there was never any problem to escape. Just a question, you're a white man in a black community, and you got to stick out like a sore thumb. Then of course, the August the 22nd. No, August the 17th it was. He dropped the bomb on August 15th, I guess. It was August 17th, 2 days apparently after they dropped the bomb. They put the officers on what we call the honey bucket detail. Draining the toilets and putting it on the garden, on the field. And we protested. They'd never done that to the officers before. And Colonel Henry with the Air Force was our senior officer, and he went down and protested. And they told him that we had no reason to protest, that our nation had used a new and illegal kind of weapon on them, and they had protested to Geneva about it. And strange as it might seem, Captain Eugene Conrad said, "By God, I bet they dropped an atomic bomb on them." And later, I said, chairs, everybody will fix them. Later, recently, I've seen Gene several times. I finally asked him, "Gene, how did you ever get the idea they dropped an atomic bomb?" He says, "Before I went to the Philippines, I read an article by Westbrook Pegler. It indicated the possibilities of this kind of thing being developed." He said, "I just put the two together and figured that's what had happened." We were only there a short period of time, June until August 17th, August 22nd. The little Japanese captain got us all together and told us that the Emperor brought peace to the world. And of course we knew what he meant. And of course we took over, got a radio and so forth to see what was going on. And of course the General MacArthur's headquarters telling us to stay where we were, that recovery units would be coming in. And so it didn't affect the number of camps. A lot of them took off and went to different places. An officer group, we stayed there until September the 8th. Sometimes I getting ahead of myself. September the 2nd, the Air Force or Air Corps finally found us, and came in. I remember the 3 B-29s came in first, right over the camp, buzzed the camp, and first then they went back up and started circling. They asked us to mark our camps, which we had done, and started dropping these 55-gallon barrels, many of them welded together on parachutes. And of course, they were breaking loose from these parachutes and coming to the ground, going through the buildings, and killed one Japanese guard. We cleared the camp because they were hitting the camp, all right. But we didn't want to be there because most of them were breaking loose. And of course, we covered that, got that food together. We still stayed there until September the 8th when the troop of the 1st Cavalry Division came up. And they moved us out on the 9th. And something you remember how you went up. There wasn't room to move on these little railroad cars that you were on. Mm-hmm. And going back, they said each prisoner had a seat. One seat to himself. So it was quite a contrast. We went back into Yokohama. And General MacArthur came down, and I say the old man had tears in his eyes, and he said a few words. Don't remember precisely what he said, but he felt he could see the condition we were in. Sure. And in any event, the first thing they did was take our clothes, run us through a shower, come out the other side. Get new uniforms. So then they put us on a ship. The Army people put on a ship to go to Manila, and I went to Manila on a Navy ship. And of course, whoever's in charge of the ship, or the captain of the ship, probably a lieutenant commander or something, order was that the galley would be open at all times, and whenever we wanted to eat, we could eat, which we did. And we got to Manila, and they processed us there and sort of turned us loose. They gave us physical checkups and so forth to make sure we could get home all right. And of course, I'd prefer to fly home, but I said, I'm going to take first transportation. I can get out and get home. And it happened to be a boat. And my good friend Galbraith from Florida, he said, by God, he's going to wait there for an airplane. He'd meet me in San Francisco. And sure enough, he did meet me in San Francisco. But from there, what they did was put us in Letterman General Hospital for a couple of days there, checked us over again, and then sent us to the Army hospital nearest to your home, which in my case was Schick General Hospital in Clinton, Iowa. And I was from Iowa. They sent me there. And I spent, I don't know how long there. But they decided I ought to go to Walter Reed. They sent me up to Walter Reed, and I had a little thing on my lip, and they were worried about it. And so I went up to Walter Reed, and nobody fiddled around up there for a couple of weeks. Nobody's doing it, even looking at me. So I finally says, "Hey, wait a minute, something's got to give here. I've been around here for a couple of weeks. I had a good time, but they were letting my kid go when as I wanted. But somebody ought to be taking a look at this thing." And so the next morning, some lieutenant colonel medic type came by and looked at me. He said, "Hale," he says, "that's not a carcinoma." He said, "Take that off tomorrow morning." And then I said, "Well, I got something on my finger. I don't know what happened to it." He said, "Take that off tomorrow morning." So he took it off the next morning. I guess I was around there another 2 or 3 days, and sent me back to Schick. And ultimately, I go back to duty after I had 2 weeks R&R in Miami Beach. That's where I met my wife. She had come back to do the recreation program for the Japanese prisoners of war down there. And I guess that's pretty much my story of World War II. Any questions?
Okay, but one, and why this camp that you were sent to, I forgot the name of it, why was it called Officers Propaganda?
Oh, because the treatment was so much. I'd been in a camp where I was working. I was on the business end of a yo-yo pole, carrying coal into a furnace and carrying the ashes out. Mm-hmm. And where we were working, at least the officers there weren't working, except as they required us occasionally to go out in the garden and do things like that. And obviously the treatment, wasn't as bad. My goodness, at Yonagal, well, we had 105 die in the short time I was there out of 400.
So why don't we, since you got out of the service and went back in, didn't you? Or did you stay?
No, I came out and went through law school and went back in. Yeah.
But why don't go into any detail of your civilian activities? Well, I'm not saying that right. Why don't you just, since let's just continue the thing right on up.
Well,
through until you retire.
After I went, while I was in the Philippines, before the war started, as I had indicated, I'm sure before, I became an aerial observer for the Infantry observer, and was assigned with the Air Corps. And while I was riding with the Air Corps, I said, "Well, heck, I ought to be flying this thing." So I applied got back to Randolph Field as a student officer for pilot training. Mm-hmm. And it came back that it was approved at the end of your tour duty in the Philippines. So when I came back, I took the Air Corps physical all over again. I passed it again, and went up to Randolph Field. And I said, "Here I am. I was approved to attend pilot training school after my return from the Philippines, and I'm here. And that's what I want to do." And they said, "Sorry about that. You're now over age, and we're not giving any any waivers for age." So I basically I went up to San Marcos for a little while, and they put me in running an officers club and that sort of nonsense. So I came back and went to the University of Tennessee Law School. I'd always wanted to go to law school anyway, and I did that. Okay. And then I said, "Well, gee whiz, I've got so much time in the military, I guess I'll go back in the military, especially got regular permission to go back in the Army JAG." And I served 3 tours in the Pentagon. I enjoyed being in Washington. A lot of people didn't, but I did. I had a particularly good job. The one I liked the best was in litigation, or the general branch in the litigation division, where we had what we call the extraordinary legal remedy cases, which involved primarily habeas corpus, but other types of extraordinary legal remedies too. And we were authorized by the Attorney General to do the pleadings and appearances in court. And at that point in time, of course, there number of World War II soldiers still in jail filing petitions for writ of habeas corpus, this kind of thing. One of the more interesting cases I had was the Dickinson case, the West Virginia soldier who was elected to stay with the communists in Korea. He filed a petition for writ of habeas corpus, and I represented the United States in the District Court of Appeals and the Appeals Supreme Court. In his case, I got there, but at that point in time, Solicitor General takes over. I had another one of the more interesting cases was jurisdiction over civilians, and military and civilians overseas. With Dorothy K. Smith, daughter of General Kruger. She was tried for murder of her husband in Japan and convicted and sentenced to done with his life, whatever years it was, up in West Virginia at Aldous, in West Virginia at Charleston. And she filed a petition for writ of habeas corpus challenging the jurisdiction of the military in capital cases. And I had that case, carried that one. Of course, we won that in the district court, and then the Air Force had one where the wife had murdered the husband in England, at Covert in that case, and they lost theirs in the district court, so the two cases were consolidated and taken back to the Supreme Court. And I wrote the primary brief and the primary thing for the Supreme Court, and we won it. Of course, Solicitor General represents the United States. My name was on the brief, but then I didn't know enough to become a member of the Supreme Court at that time, and so my name was taken off when the final thing came out. But we won it 5-4 going in, and old Justice Harlan kicked the traces and voted for rehearing. And at that time, we knew we were in trouble, and we spent a lot of time and effort trying to maintain our jurisdiction over civilians overseas. And well, a lot of, actually, the Defense Department appointed 3 people to cooperate with the Solicitor General and Justice Department in representing in federal courts. And I was one from the Army and had one from the Navy and one from the Air Force to write the briefs. I wrote the brief on the necessity. Everybody knew that was the primary thing that we had to go on. And had to enlarge the jurisdiction under necessary and proper caution. The last clause of the first article says, do those things that are necessary and proper for the carrying out of all the enumerated things it could do, and says Congress may raise money and so forth, support the Army, Navy, and Air Force, make regulations, do all that kind of thing. We said the necessary and proper clause was necessary for us to have jurisdiction for these people overseas because nobody else had it. And well, I had a detail of JAG officers actually that worked over in the archives for some period of time, looking at all the constitutions of the original 13 states. We reviewed it. The primary claim was we had no jurisdiction in time of peace. Then we also reviewed all the records, military records we could find of activities up to that time where because it always authorized jurisdiction over people accompanying the armed forces or the Army. And we found, and of course the theory was it's time of war. And so we just located, I think found 3 or 4 cases where it was not time of war, and we showed we tried what they called settlers, PX people who were selling merchandise, but accompanying the armed forces in the field back during the times, during the Indian Wars and so forth. And we showed no hostilities were in existence at that point in time, therefore it's time of peace. But still didn't commence hard, and so we lost it 5-4. One other case that I went to Supreme Court on was Harmon and Abramowitz, cases involving people who had been separated from the service for being communists or communist sympathizers. And Abramowitz, the evidence was clear that he never denied he was a member of the Communist Party, and the evidence showed that he was. Harmon was much closer case. We had won those cases. We've been challenged all over the various districts around the country, giving them bad conduct discharge, undesirable discharges. And we had won those cases all around in the district courts before they had appeared in all the courts of appeal in which they had appeared. They finally got the Supreme Court on it. And the court granted certiorari, and we went up there, and we of course, took the position basically that a soldier who had disqualified, a person who disqualified himself for service in the armed forces by reason of his prior activities wasn't entitled to the same kind of discharge as a person who had not disqualified himself and who served honorably during his service. And that was basically, I mean, we had a lot of rhetoric, but that was what it all boiled down to. And I finally lost that one 5-4. so they have to get those people. Well, in any event, I had several tours there, 3 tours in the Pentagon once. One of them, I was in the Inspector General's office. We had 2 lawyers in the Inspector General's office, and that was a very interesting assignment, which you were representing Secretary of the Army on investigations, which are Army significance. I enjoyed that tour. As I used to tell the Army JAGs, when I go on an Army post, it said Judge Everett Dillon's Corps officer, people could care less. But when I went out there, Colonel Judge Everett Dillon's Corps from the Secretary of the Army's office, they wanted to know what the hell I was doing out there, what was going on. So, of course, it was very interesting. The IG was very independent. The only thing you did was go in and tell the commanding general. You wouldn't accept any amenities at all. You took your own car, you rented your own car. You didn't do anything with it, except you went telling whether his command was involved or was not involved. That's why you were there. That was it. Then I had my last tour was one of my more interesting assignments. Is the Staff Judge Everett, 7th Corps in New York from 66, 69. What made it interesting, anybody else never be after, but was General Milner was commanding. And when I walked in to report to him, he said, "Sit down." He says, "I don't like judge advocates. They've been disloyal to me." And that includes the present Judge Everett General of the Army. And you start from there. So if you had been in the JAG Corps, as I was, in the formative stages of the JAG Corps, after they brought the lawyers into the service, you ran into this kind of thing all the way up. They didn't want lawyers. Lawyers had no place in the military. And they resented the idea, and you had the problem in the court-martials and so forth. But ultimately, and I know when I first became involved as a defense counsel, colonels tell me, "No use trying to argue these cases to the court-martial. They know what's happening." I said, "Well, you just be aware of what's going on. You're going to see a complete difference in old court-martial setup, and that's what's going to happen." I'm not going to accept the idea that the prosecutor, the trial counsel, is the only actor in this case. When I'm defending, you're going to find another actor out there who's going to be defending this defendant as best as he knows how. And it's not going to be a one-act play with the prosecutor as the only actor. There's going to be another actor out there, and this thing's going to change. Well, they were very resentful of that in the early years. It starts out in 49, 50, 51, 52. It was hard, it was tough on the JAG officers back then, but you had to stand your ground. And this was the last one I'd ever run into who still had this kind of an attitude, because over the years you had seen that we reached the point where military court-martial sentences were less than the soldiers would be getting if they were tried in the foreign courts or in our own courts here in the States. Because they were being defended, and there was no longer a one-act player, or you might say it's two-act player, the commanding general who appointed the court, and the trial counsel, all the prosecutors, they were all supposed to be 2 people acting in the case, because the deck was loaded. But it's changed. It changed over the years, and the soldier gets a fair trial just like he would get in the civilian community. In fact, it probably maybe changed too much. But anyway, to go back to my general, he was one of my favorite people, and I always say this. Give you an idea how this thing worked. People might be interested in how it worked. I told you what he told me to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
He would tell me that, I would make recommendations and so forth, and he would get mad. And, he told me, he said, command and law are incompatible. Several times he kept telling me this. And I said, General, you can't make me mad. I said, when you catch your first commission, when you're promoted there, you raise your hand and swear you're going to uphold the constitutional law of these United States. Mm-hmm. That would mean exactly what I say. And reached the point where, the chief of staff called me as general and says, he says, I don't know what to do. He says, I know by law you've got the right to deal with graduate commanding general. That's what the law says you do. And that's exactly what the law says I do. I don't report to you or anybody else. I'm the general's my boss here. He says, he says, when you come out of there, he comes out mad as hell, and he takes it out on me. He says, would you have any objection if I just came in and sat down while you were in there? And he said, I won't say anything, but if I just came in and sat down, maybe things would change. I said, I'm telling you, as long as he has the attitude that the command and law are incompatible, there's no way we're going to get along. And it's going to be this way. I said, I have no objection to coming in, but I don't see how it's going to change anything unless he changes his attitude. Mm-hmm. I guess he told me he was going to relieve me about 2 or 3 times, and maybe more than that. I said, General, you can relieve me anytime you want. All you got to do is pick up that telephone over there. Call the Judge Advocate General, and he'll send you new staff judge. I know that. And he said, that's you can do that. And one time I told him, I said, you're mad as hell. I said, no. I said, General, when I first came in the Judge Advocate General's Court, I had a colonel who told me, he said, no, Cecil, when you become the staff judge advocate, you go in and deal with your commanding general like he's sitting there in his birthday suit. His rank doesn't make any difference. You deal with him. I told him that, and he bowed out. I told my deputy staff judge out there, I said, now look, I have no intention of backing off. I'm going to tell him what the law is and make a recommendation. And he can, whether he accepts or not, that's up to him. But I'm not going to back off. He's not going to. And I said, if it ever appears to you that I'm in any way backing off from this man, let me know, because I have no intention of doing it. I don't care what he does, but as long as we're right, we'll just go right on and plow ahead. I'll take full responsibility for what happens. We wrestled there for 6 months. We didn't get along at all. And finally he said to me, after about 6 months, he finally said to me, he said, Judge, he says, you notice that I've been going along with your recommendation lately? I said, yes, sir, General. I've noticed that. And I said, we're doing good. He said, you're right, we're doing well. From then on, the sun rose and set on me. I was called in on all kinds of things not related to the law. And so we parted good friends. And actually, I was the only one he had mentioned when he left to get his 4-star over in Vietnam. And in fact, he suggested I might want to go with him. I didn't know I hadn't left anything over there. No. So, anyway, you want to know more? Basically, that was my last tour. Tour before that, I had been in the IG in Washington, and I enjoyed that tour. I'd been staff judge advocate at Fort Carson, at the 4th Infantry Division out there. And then I was deputy staff judge advocate over the 8th Army in Korea. So I didn't have many assignments. I was at Fort Bragg twice, Pentagon 3 times, Fort Monmouth once, Korea once, and 7th Army once. The 7th Army was what's called Chief Military Affairs back in 51, 54. That was in the early days. And, well, I've been asked to be defense counsel too often. That was a major, and I guess it was over there was promoted lieutenant colonel. But they had a system where soldiers could ask for defense individual counsel for a defense attorney. And I started getting too many requests for capital cases. Now I said, hey. As I said, I wouldn't defend a capital case for all the money in the world if I was in the civilian community, because I wouldn't do it. It's too hard. And I said, I'll take my share of these capital cases, but everybody else is going to have to take their share too, because I'm not just going to do it. Because it's that'll wear you down in a hurry. I never lost one to where you're going to be executed, but I think I came close a few times. So,
sure, that's not.
I wouldn't represent a person in a capital case in the civilian community. Wow, that's a good way to lose all your hair, or have it turn white. But since I retired from the Army, of course, I worked for the state as assistant prosecutor, a job I enjoyed.
Right.
Over in the Sessions Court, and I did what I thought was right. And frankly, of course, they wanted me to come over and prosecute, and they come to court. And I said, no, I think I'm doing much more good here for this city than anybody else could do over here. Of course, Ron Webster says, well, you're deciding policy for this office. And I said, well, Ron, you know what you can do. You appointed me. You can relieve me, but as long as I'm over there, I'm going to make the judgment that I think is right. And I enjoyed that. And one of the unique things about it, I've always said, the criminal bar, I had their support, their loyalty, the bar as a whole, and the police officers. Police officers thought the sun rose and set on what I did. And I explained to them, told them what we were going to do in the case, and they, whatever I thought was right, and that was written up twice in the New Sentinel. These are things that bug me, and people don't understand. First case, it was interesting. I believe his name was Schaefer, a tackle in the University of Iowa, the University of Tennessee football team, early on, many years ago. He'd been picked up for drunk driving, and came in, and Officer Doyle, who said the man was drunk, and Sergeant, what's his name? Sergeant, anyway, who was with him, said he wasn't. And Doyle charged him with being driving alone. And I just told Doyle, I said, look, I don't feel prosecute a case like that. I said, no way I'm going in there with you saying one thing and the sergeant saying something else. And obviously, first I'm going to lose it, and I'm not that kind of a prosecutor. I know what the evidence is, and I just won't prosecute a case that I don't think is warranted. So we went in for the judge, and I told him, I said, you can talk to the judge in there if you want, but I'll tell him what happened. You can speak up, say whatever you like. So we went in, and I explained to Bradley was the judge at that time, Sessions Court cases, and I said, tell him what had happened. And I said, of course, I recommend the case be reduced to reckless driving and be fined and so forth. And Doyle, and I said, now Officer Doyle wants to talk to you about the case. And he listened to Doyle out, and he says, charge be reduced to reckless driving, and set the off-fine cost. I guess that's what I recommend. I don't remember anyone. Doyle went over the New Sentinel and complained that the charge was reduced because I like football players. True, I go to football games, and that's one of my favorite sports, but it had nothing to do with what I did in the case. And actually, New Sentinel called me and wanted to know, said Doyle was there, and wanted to know if I had any reaction. I said, look, I don't try my cases in the newspaper. If you want to know what happened, all you had to be, if you'd been there, you'd heard what position I took.
Yeah.
And I said, I have no reason to talk to you about what I do in the courtroom. The courtroom's open. If you want to know what I did, come over and listen. I have nothing to hide. And so they came out with a big story. I like football players and charges reduced. And Bradley was mad at me because I didn't tell him, because he thought it was a reflection on him too.
Well, these newspapers will fix you up.
And then I had one other case that a New Sentinel was this case fixed? It involved another drunk driving case, and also alleged bribery. And it involved a former assistant attorney general down here in Madisonville. I didn't know from Adam. I knew who that was. But in any event, for some reason, the officer come to me and talked to me the morning after the arrest. He told me what he charged him with. And they told him charged me. I said, bribery? There's no bribery charge there. I said, what are you talking about? And so the case had been set on Wimberly's docket for a first hearing. And the officer who made the arrest came to me while I was out in the courtroom prosecuting and said, hey, I'm on the night shift. I said, yeah. I said, I want to change that case. I said, well, what do you want to change it to? I said, I don't care what you change it to. I said, just go in and tell the clerk that I told him to change that case to whenever he would be on the day shift, and tell him to call the bonding company who made the bond, tell him that the case had been changed. And next thing I knew, the day that it was initially set, in walks this Zane Daniels. I saw Zane, and this other attorney, former assistant attorney general. And as he came down to the front of the court, I guess 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the doctor about through, I said, well, Zane, I said, the case has been reset. I said, the clerk was supposed to notify your bonding company, and so you wouldn't come in. I said, maybe they didn't do that, but that was what the plan was. The officer's not here. And he says, I think there's open court where everybody can hear what was said. And Zane says, well, let me talk to Fornash and see if there's any way we can work this case out. And the judge says, well, we'll recess shortly and you can talk about it. So we went back and I talked to Zane and what had happened. And I said, well, obviously there's no bribery case. I said, I wouldn't even suggest there was a bribery case. And the drunk driving case would do just what they do in all the other cases that I have here. Treat him just like I do anybody else. And Zane said, well, okay, that's okay. So I went back in and I told the judge, I said, there's no bribery case. It's not even close. And all I've got is a drunk driving case, and we've agreed on my normal recommendation for these cases. And so the news channel comes out, was this case fixed? And frankly, I mean, they suggested, of course, Wimberly thought they were talking about him. I didn't fix the case. I thought they were talking about me. And in any event, the bribery case was simply they'd taken this defendant, and he said something about the how much the bond was or something like that, and they said $200, and he wrote out a check to the Knoxville Police Department and signed his name to it. He says, hell, I could buy the whole Knoxville Police Department for that. and some drunk back in the jail said, well, that's bribery. And the officer thought he had a bribery case. And how would you ever bribe a police officer by writing a check to the Knoxville Police Department?
Well, that brings us up to stuff, doesn't it, pretty well?
You might be interested in Bob May. He's had some interesting experiences.